Most people look at the pile of dry branches, cracked logs, and half-rotted wood at the edge of their yard and see a problem waiting to be solved. Something to burn, something to haul away, something that feels like clutter. What almost no one sees is that they are standing on top of one of the most powerful soil-building tools nature has ever designed. While money is being spent on fertilizer, irrigation lines, and soil additives, a complete system for water storage and nutrient production is quietly being discarded as waste. This is not because the method is outdated or ineffective. It is because it has been forgotten. Somewhere along the way, gardening shifted from working with long-term biological processes to managing short-term inputs. We were taught to feed plants directly instead of feeding systems. We were taught to water constantly instead of storing moisture where roots can reach it when they need it most. And in doing so, we abandoned a technique that requires no electricity, no chemicals, and no ongoing cost. Rotting wood is not dead material, it is dormant infrastructure. Inside every log is a network of fibers designed to move water, store carbon, and host life. When buried beneath soil, those same fibers become the foundation of a system that regulates moisture, stabilizes temperature, and releases nutrients slowly over many years. It is not compost in the traditional sense. It is something deeper, slower, and far more durable. Long before modern gardening manuals existed, people learned this by watching forests. Fallen trees did not rot away into nothing. They became nurse logs. Seedlings sprouted from them. Moss and fungi colonized them. Moisture lingered there long after the surrounding ground dried out. Life stacked itself on top of decay, and instead of fighting that process, early farmers copied it. What we now call burying rotten wood was once common knowledge. It was a way to turn waste into wealth, to turn dead matter into long-term fertility. The technique does not demand precision or constant monitoring, it rewards patience. Once installed, it works quietly in the background, improving soil structure, feeding microorganisms, and buffering plants against extremes. This is not about adding one more gardening trick to your routine. It is about replacing effort with structure, about building something once that continues working long after you stop paying attention to it. And once you understand what buried wood actually does beneath the soil, it becomes impossible to see those discarded logs the same way again. Centuries before synthetic fertilizers and irrigation systems, farmers in the mountainous regions of Central Europe were already solving problems that still challenge us today. In places where soil was thin, winters were harsh, and water was unreliable, people did not have the luxury of wasting effort. Every action had to compound over time, and through careful observation of forests, they discovered something modern systems forgot. They noticed that where trees had fallen and slowly decayed, the ground stayed fertile. Crops planted nearby grew stronger. Moisture lingered longer. Even in dry years, those areas resisted failure. Instead of clearing this material away, they buried it deliberately beneath their fields. Branches, logs, twigs, and woody debris were layered below soil and planted over. The result was not immediate abundance, but something far more valuable: consistency. This method became known as mound culture or hugelkultur, though the name matters less than the principle behind it. It was a recognition that soil is not just dirt. It is a living system that stores water, exchanges gases, and feeds plants indirectly through microbial partnerships. By burying wood, farmers were installing a slow, biological engine beneath their crops. What made this approach powerful was not speed, but longevity. These buried logs decomposed slowly, feeding fungi and bacteria year after year. Roots learned to grow downward instead of staying shallow. Fields became more resilient instead of more dependent. While neighboring land struggled through dry spells, these beds continued producing. Modern gardening moved in the opposite direction. Flat beds, quick inputs, fast results. The focus shifted toward what could be measured immediately rather than what accumulated quietly over time. The idea of waiting years for soil to improve felt inefficient, even though the alternative required constant correction. But forests never needed that correction. No one fertilizes a woodland. No one irrigates ancient trees. And yet, they remain productive, stable, and self-sustaining. The difference is not effort, it is structure. Forests are built on layers of decay that store water and nutrients deep below the surface. By burying wood, you are not copying a trick. You are restoring an operating system that has already been tested for centuries. You are creating conditions where plants cooperate with the soil instead of competing against it. And once this foundation is in place, the garden stops feeling fragile. To understand why this system works so well, you have to look at what wood really is. While a tree is alive, its entire structure is built to move water. Microscopic tubes run through every branch and trunk, pulling moisture from the soil and lifting it toward the leaves. That internal plumbing does not disappear when the tree dies. It simply changes function. As wood begins to rot, fungi move in first. They break apart lignin and cellulose, opening those tiny channels even wider. Bacteria follow, feeding on the byproducts. What was once a solid log slowly becomes a porous network filled with air pockets and cavities. Over time, the wood transforms into something closer to a sponge than a block of timber. When rain falls on a traditional garden bed, most of that water is lost. Some runs off the surface, some evaporates within hours. Very little remains where roots can access it during dry periods. But when that same water reaches buried wood, it is pulled inward and stored. A single decomposing log can hold several times its own weight in moisture. This storage happens underground, where sunlight and wind cannot steal it away. The water remains cool, protected, and stable. As the surrounding soil dries, plant roots respond. They sense the moisture below and grow downward toward it. Instead of shallow, fragile root systems, you get deep, resilient ones. This creates a natural slow-release system. Water is not delivered in sudden bursts that encourage weak growth. It is released gradually, molecule by molecule, directly into the root zone. Even during long dry spells, plants continue to access moisture without stress. This is why gardens built on buried wood behave differently during drought. Leaves stay firm. Growth slows gently instead of collapsing. Fruit continues to develop. The gardener notices something unusual. The need to intervene disappears. The system does not panic when rain stops. It was designed for interruption. The buried wood acts like a battery, charged during wet periods and discharged slowly when conditions become harsh. And unlike mechanical systems, it does this silently, without maintenance. Once you experience this shift, irrigation stops feeling like a constant emergency. Water becomes something the soil manages on its own, and that changes everything about how you relate to the garden. The true advantage of this stored moisture becomes visible during extreme conditions. When heat waves arrive and the surface soil turns dry and brittle, most gardens enter survival mode. Leaves wilt, growth stalls, flowers drop. The gardener reacts with more water, more effort, more stress. In a wood-based system, something very different happens. As the top layer dries, a moisture gradient forms beneath the surface. Water remains locked inside the decomposing logs. Plant roots detect this difference and continue growing downward, accessing reserves that remain untouched by evaporation. This process turns the buried wood into a slow, regulated supply rather than an emergency reserve. Water is released only when needed. There is no flooding, no runoff, no sudden swings. The plant experiences consistency, and consistency is the foundation of health. Because the moisture stays underground, it is shielded from wind and sun. The two forces responsible for most water loss in gardens. Even during prolonged dry periods, the soil around the roots remains cool and slightly damp. This stabilizes the entire system. But water is only part of the story. As decomposition continues, heat is released. Microorganisms breaking down carbon generate warmth as a byproduct of their activity. This heat radiates upward, subtly warming the soil from below. In early spring, this can make the difference between growth and stagnation. While neighboring beds remain cold and unresponsive, wood-based beds begin waking up. Seeds germinate sooner, roots stay active, plants establish earlier and stronger. In autumn, the same process delays soil cooling. Frost becomes less destructive. Roots remain functional longer. The growing season quietly extends at both ends without any mechanical intervention. This warmth is not dramatic or visible. It is steady and reliable. Just enough to buffer plants from sudden temperature drops. Just enough to reduce stress during seasonal transitions. The garden stops reacting violently to weather. Instead, it absorbs fluctuations and smooths them out. And once stress is reduced, everything else improves. Growth, flavor, resilience, and yield. As the wood continues to break down beneath the soil, it becomes more than a water reservoir or a heat source. It transforms into a long-term nutrient engine. Unlike compost or fertilizer, which release nutrients quickly and then disappear, buried wood feeds the soil slowly, steadily, and predictably over many years. Wood is rich in carbon. When fungi and bacteria begin digesting it, they form complex underground networks. These fungal threads move nutrients, exchange minerals with plant roots, and stabilize the soil structure itself. This shifts the soil ecosystem away from bacteria dominance and toward fungal dominance, which is where long-term fertility lives. Instead of nutrients washing away with every rainfall, they are held in place. Nitrogen is captured and released gradually. Calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and trace minerals migrate into the root zone over time. There are no spikes and crashes, no forced growth followed by exhaustion. The plants receive exactly what they need when they need it. Each season the soil becomes darker, looser, and more alive. Earthworms appear without being invited. Fungal fruiting bodies emerge after rain. The bed begins to resemble a forest floor rather than a cultivated plot. This is why these systems improve with age. The first year is preparation. The second year shows promise. By year 3 and beyond, the soil reaches a level of balance that annual systems never achieve. You stop feeding the soil feeds itself. At the surface, the effects are obvious. Plants grow taller with thicker stems. Leaves remain deep green without intervention. Fruits develop richer flavors and stronger aromas. Yield increases without added inputs. But the most important change is invisible. Roots stop living in panic. They are no longer racing between drought and saturation, cold and heat, deficiency and overload. They exist in a buffered environment that allows them to function efficiently. This stability strengthens plant immune systems. Pests become less aggressive. Diseases struggle to take hold. A plant that is not stressed does not signal vulnerability. At this stage, the garden stops feeling fragile. You are no longer defending it from collapse. You are simply managing abundance. As the system matures, another powerful effect begins to emerge. The shape of the land itself starts working in your favor. When wood is buried and soil is mounded above it, you are no longer gardening on a flat surface. You are sculpting terrain, and terrain controls climate. Each mound creates multiple microenvironments within a single bed. One side warms early in the morning and holds heat through the day. Another remains cooler and shaded, protected from harsh afternoon sun. Moisture behaves differently at the base than it does near the peak. Wind slows as it passes over the contours. This allows you to grow plants together that would normally compete or fail when placed side by side. Heat-loving crops thrive where warmth accumulates. Tender greens settle into cooler zones where moisture lingers. Deep-rooted plants tap into the stored reserves below, while shallow-rooted crops benefit from the moderated surface conditions. Drainage also improves automatically. Excess water moves downward and outward instead of pooling around roots. Even in heavy clay soil or regions with intense rainfall, roots remain oxygenated and healthy. Waterlogging becomes nearly impossible. These mounds capture sunlight more efficiently. Low-angle winter sun strikes the slopes instead of glancing off flat ground. Frost settles lower, away from the crown of plants. Cold air drains downhill, while warmth remains trapped near the soil surface. Over time, this reshaped landscape begins to function like a living greenhouse without walls. The soil holds heat, the wood releases warmth. The plants shelter one another. Growth accelerates earlier in the season and continues later into the year. What once required tunnels, covers, or artificial protection now happens naturally. You plant earlier, you harvest longer. Crops that once struggled now flourish. At this point, the garden is no longer reacting to weather, it is regulating it. You have shifted from fighting the climate to designing around it. This is where gardening stops being seasonal labor and starts becoming system management. Small adjustments replace constant intervention, observation replaces exhaustion. The effects of buried wood go beyond water and temperature. Plant health improves in ways most gardeners never witness. When roots grow in a consistently moist, insulated environment, they are no longer stressed by sudden swings in temperature or moisture. Stress is the hidden culprit behind weak growth, pest outbreaks, and poor yields. By creating stability beneath the surface, you give plants the gift of focus. Instead of using energy to survive, they invested in growth, flowering, and fruit production. Leaves are lush and deeply colored. Fruits become larger, sweeter, and more nutrient-dense. Herbs and vegetables develop stronger flavors and medicinal qualities because they are allowed to mature without interruption. The diversity of microbes in the decomposing wood also strengthens plant immunity. Beneficial fungi and bacteria colonize the root zone, forming a natural barrier against pathogens. These microscopic allies outcompete harmful organisms, creating a self-regulating ecosystem underground. Imagine your tomatoes thriving without blight, your lettuces never bolting prematurely, and your carrots reaching full sweetness every season. It's not magic, it's biology working the way it was meant to, and yet this system is entirely passive once installed. No fertilizers to mix, no irrigation to monitor. You simply plant, observe, and harvest. The buried wood continues to break down slowly, releasing nutrients and water at the exact rate your crops need. This is a garden that thinks for itself, where effort is front-loaded and returns compound year after year. Now consider the long-term impact. Unlike traditional gardening that depletes the soil and forces you to restart annually, this method strengthens the land with each passing season. Soil fertility grows, structure improves, microclimates stabilize. Your garden becomes a resilient living network capable of surviving droughts, cold snaps, and heat waves. You are no longer just growing food. You are cultivating a self-sustaining ecosystem. One mound at a time, you are reclaiming the natural intelligence of the forest and bringing it into your backyard. By now, you can see that burying wood is not just a gardening technique, it's a paradigm shift. You are no longer at the mercy of seasons, droughts, or expensive fertilizers. You are building a foundation, a living system that feeds itself, protects itself, and strengthens over time. The branches and logs you once saw as waste are now the backbone of a thriving, resilient garden. Think about the legacy you are creating. In 10 years, your garden will look nothing like the ordinary plots around you. Plants will reach heights and produce yields that would astonish your neighbors. Soil will be darker, richer, and teeming with life. Every mound you create is a mini ecosystem, a fortress of fertility, a slow-release powerhouse of water and nutrients. And the beauty of it? This system requires very little ongoing effort. No more rushing to water plants during a heat wave. No more battling in fertile soil with chemical fertilizers that only offer short-term results. The wood does the work for you. Quietly, efficiently, and sustainably, you are also reclaiming a piece of history. You are practicing an ancient method, perfected over centuries in the forests and fields of Europe, and bringing it into the modern age. By doing this, you're not only feeding your family, you are restoring balance to your soil, your garden, and your connection with nature. Now it's your turn to act. Start small if you need to, with just a few logs and a mound, and watch as nature takes over. Every branch you bury, every mound you build is an investment in your future. A 20-year plan for abundant harvests, for food security, for a garden that grows smarter, not harder. Don't wait for another dry season, another failed crop, or another bill for fertilizer and irrigation. Transform your yard into a living, self-sustaining food system. Take the knowledge you've learned today, start building your hugel mounds, and watch your garden evolve into a powerful, perennial, and productive ecosystem. If you're ready to reclaim control over your garden and your food supply, start today. Plant the seeds of resilience, bury the logs of opportunity, and let nature do the rest. Your future self and your soil will thank you.